This is not a story, but a real life event that actually happened to me. I live in a small town in Kentucky where there is nothing, no hope, no jobs, and nothing but churches all around. I was at church one night, and this preacher put his hand on my head and prayed that God would reveal himself to me. He then went on to the next person to pray. I got up and started walking towards the exit of the church. All the jumping and shouting was scaring me, and honestly, it feels nothing of God. It seems like it's more the perks kicking in than anything else. As I left out the door, I went outside to smoke. I walk around the building, and there's a little creek behind the church, so I ended up walking back behind there. As I was standing out there, smoking a cigarette, the hair stood up on my neck, and I got the feeling that I was being watched. I noticed across the creek, in between a bunch of trees, was a pair of red eyes, but they didn't seem scary nor evil. They just seemed curious, interested. I stared back at it, and it felt like we were staring for hours, but it was just a few minutes. There was nothing, no movement, no blinking, nothing. I then heard somebody walking behind me. I turned back, and I saw it was another person who was also coming outside to smoke a cigarette. As I turned back around, the creature, or this thing, was gone. After talking and smoking, we both went back into the church, and I never saw the eyes again. I still wonder what that thing was, whatever it was. It couldn't have been an angel or God. I'm starting to think it was the devil waiting outside the church. To give you a little more insight about me, this story happened when I was 14 years old. I was at my friend Emily's house, since back then I lived there for personal reasons. Anyways, it was about 1 a.m, and her parents were gone for the night. We were watching scary movies and eating out on snacks like we usually would every weekend night. After our movie, I got up to go to the restroom, and I let my friend know that I would be back. She nodded before opening up her laptop to message her boyfriend at the time. As I walked down the dark hallway and I was coming across the bathroom, I heard my friend's voice call out to me, but it was coming from the back porch that was on the right side of the hallway, which immediately struck me as odd because I never seen her leave the room or even walk past me. And why would she be outside anyways at this time? Her voice called out to me again, so I couldn't help it but walk out to the back porch. It does take a lot to scare me after all, so I wasn't bothered by this. As it turns out, it was the biggest mistake ever. A red flag should have went off right then and there when her voice became silent as I stepped outside. I called her name softly, but she didn't reply. I called her name once more, but this time, louder. And again, nothing but silence. I stepped off the porch into the grass looking into her wooded backyard, a little pissed off now because at that time, I figured she was trying to prank scare me, like she always was. It was a normal thing for her, but when I yelled her name again, a voice spoke. But it wasn't hers, it was another woman's voice. "Help me, please, for the love of God, help me." Okay, now I was officially freaked out because there was no one around for miles besides her one neighbor that lives a little ways into the woods. I found myself not being able to move. Curiosity maybe? But the bushes started rustling and what looked like a dog stepped out. At first I thought it was her neighbor's dog that must have gotten out again because it has happened before. But when this thing stood up on its hind legs, it was about 7 feet tall. That's when I really froze up. What the hell was this thing? I asked myself. I never met any human that's this tall in my entire life. Then it started to move towards me. It was walking kind of like a human, but wobbling like a baby taking its first steps. I found myself not being able to move, to get out of there like I should have. That is, until I heard the slider door being opened, and the real Emily's voice speak. Lana, what are you doing outside? I looked around my whole house for you. As soon as she finished her sentence, I ran inside as fast as I could and pulled my friend inside before shutting the door and locking it while closing the blinds. I did this to every room, even the basement, locking all the windows included. All the while, Emily yelling at me, asking me what the fuck was going on. I took her arm and raced into her room before slamming her door behind us. When she finally realized how terrified I was and how badly I was shaking, only then did she ask me, Jesus, Lana, what's the matter? You look like you just seen a ghost. I finally calmed down enough to begin to tell her what I encountered, but before I got the chance to fully explain what happened, I heard extreme banging on my friend's window, which shocked us both, and we both shot up at least 10 feet in the air. I whispered, fuck. I realized I forgot to shut the blinds. I didn't have the heart to turn around, but when Emily's face went pale, I didn't have a choice but to look behind me. I really wish I hadn't. There, that thing was, looking into our bedroom window. I couldn't even begin to explain what it looked like. All I can come up with is that its body was twisted like someone that had just been in a freakish car accident, and it had fur, lots of it, and the eyes glowed much like a cat. A high-pitched noise escaped that thing's throat, making us not only cover our ears, but we both screamed as hard as our lungs would let us. I threw my friend on the floor before zooming into her parents' room to get her dad's .42 rifle. But when I came back, the noise stopped, and that creature was gone. Emily was rocking back and forth, holding her knees close to her, shaking and crying. She saw its face as clear as I did. The rest of the night, we had all the lights on in the house, and we stayed huddled together in the living room with the rifle right under my legs. Finally, after what seemed like years, the sun rose and her parents walked through the door. Instantly, her dad noticed our fear-stricken expressions and his gun under my legs. They sat down and softly asked both of us what happened. When I explained it, they shared worried glances before announcing that we were moving. We never asked why. We were just happy to get the hell out of there. We moved that exact day to my family's vacation home in a very populated city with little to no trees. When my own parents got home and we told them, they had the same reactions. And they told me I could never go out after dark alone and to stay away from wooded areas. Of course, I never questioned it, and to this day, I don't know if it was a skinwalker that some people believe in, or if it was an imposter. What I do know, though, that it was not human. My mom recently shared a strange and creepy experience that she and her siblings and parents witnessed when she was younger, at around 6 years of age. My mom is not the type of person to lie about this just to scare someone. And also, my aunts and uncles have verified the story individually. My grandparents, mother, aunts, and uncles lived in a small pueblo, a small town, in Mexico, with a population of about 1,000 people. They were all scattered throughout the landscape. They lived at the bottom of one of the larger cerros, or hills, that would take a couple of hours to get to the very top. My abuelitos were very poor. My grandfather was making just enough to provide for their necessities by working at a sugarcane field, but yet they were living in one of the nicer homes because of its proximity to the hill and what everyone would say a witch's house at the top of that hill. Everybody around there stayed away from that house, and the rent was the cheapest there was out of everything else, out of all the other houses that were available. My abuelitos, grandparents, tias y tios, aunts and uncles, and my mom had some paranormal experiences in that house. Most of these were attributed to the witch in typical Mexican folklore fashion. This thing that they witnessed, however, was what made them leave. Mi madre, my mom, says that one day she was inside at the entrance of the home with the door wide open, playing with some toys. My tios and tias, aunts and uncles, were in the same room behind her also, while my abuelito was relaxing on a rocking chair in that room. She said she was playing and the door to the house was open. As she looked up, as a medium-sized black dog was walking along the road in front of the home. What spooked her was that this dog had 2 human breasts hanging from its chest that were connected to its skin as if it was part of its body. She says that the breasts were hairless, which allowed her to see that they were indeed the breast of a human and not some sort of tumor on the dog. My mom says that the dog instantly gave her a very bad feeling and she started to cry. My mom's crying then caused the dog to stop in its tracks and look into the doorway towards my mom. That's when my grandfather got up and headed towards the door, as so did my uncles, to see what was happening. He instantly recognized what the creature was and pulled out a small gun he always carried with him because of the long treks he made on foot to his job. He aimed the gun and tried pulling the trigger, but the gun kept jamming and would not fire. He tried it a few times, each time checking and making sure the gun was in proper working order, but it simply would not fire. All the while, the dog was just standing there, watching. The dog eventually turned and started running down the road and into some overgrowth along the side of the road. After it disappeared from view, my grandfather tried shooting his gun and it fired without a hitch. Even though they were very limited financial-wise, they moved out within a week after this encounter. Unfortunately, both of my grandparents passed when I was very young, so I cannot ask them about this event. I also never heard of skinwalkers partially changing, turning, and I found this story quite interesting. Sometimes, when we gather together as a family, joking and playing and having a good time, I tell my mom to bring up this story just to give everybody a spook. In a quick summary, that she saw a black dog with human breast hanging from its chest. Grandfather's firearm jammed when he was trying to fire at the dog, and then the gun started working perfectly fine once this dog ran away. Most of my family, when they hear this story, believe it was the bruja, the witch, who lived on top of the cerro, the hill, who apparently, they always say, was a nagual. My mom told me about an experience that she had when she encountered a nagual in the place where my mom grew up. She said that a group of town people were saying that they were seeing a large black bird out at night and it was creeping people out. So one day, some guys got in a truck and encountered a large black bird in the middle of the road following them. One guy took a shot at it and they said that the bullet went through its wing and it flew away. But they recall that when they shot it, they heard the scream, the wail of a woman. Later on, they noticed that an old lady who lived in an isolated home by herself all of a sudden had her arm in a sling and she had a wound from a gunshot. She had already been suspected of being a bruja or a nagual, and they believed that this incident confirmed it. I'm not Navajo or Native or even Indian, but I have a Skinwalker story. So here it goes. I go along with a friend to check out his grandfather's hogan. For those who don't know, a hogan is basically an old traditional Navajo dwelling place, mostly made out of logs and mud, with a door traditionally facing east. Anyways, his grandfather is in the hospital for a spell. My friend says that his grandfather had an accident there on the property. We get to the place and we're hanging out for a while, drinking some beers and sharing a blunt. When out of nowhere, my friend goes real still and puts his finger up to his lips like he wants me to be quiet. I hear this shuffling noise coming from just outside. And just an FYI, my friend has dark skin. So as I look at him, his face turns several shades more pale. The shuffling noise becomes more loud, as if someone is coming towards the door. My friend grabs a piece of burning firewood out of the stove. He goes over to the door and hurls it out in front of the hogan. We then hear it hit the ground, and immediately there is this high-pitched laughter, something like the Wicked Witch of the West. Every hair on my body stands up. My friend starts yelling out in some native language. All I can do is pull out my pocket knife and hold it up to be ready. The person outside just keeps laughing, and I finally get the cojones to move over towards the door and peek out. My heart nearly jumps out of my chest. Only several feet from me is this Skinwalker. It's leaning up against the wall just to the right, thin and scraggly, covered with these animal skins, and staring back at me with these eyes like black marbles. I'm convinced it's a woman, as I see what looks to be breasts beneath the skins, but thin and sagging, like she's really old. Her face is covered with splotches of hair, and I can't tell if it's real or some kind of get-up. I let out a bit of scream, though I hate to admit it, and it just turns and jogs off towards the hills to the other side of the hogan. That's the only time I've seen a Skinwalker since, and I hope I never see one again. To start this off, there are 0 bears, moose, or elk where I lived at the time. At the time I was around 12 or 14, and I was with my friend, who I will call Kayla. We planned on going on a picnic around her fields. As we walked up a smaller hill, Kayla pushed me to the ground and whispered, "Do you see that?" At least 20 or so feet away, there was a dark figure. It was standing on 4 thin limbs, and its head was narrow, similar to a horse or a deer, but it was completely black. I couldn't make out the features, but it had a mane like a lion. The mane-like fur ran along its back, stopping near the rear, and it also had no tail. Here's a side note: all of the cattle were moved to a completely different area, nowhere near this one, so no other livestock animals were in those fields. But this thing was just staring off. Suddenly, my friend stood up and made a rush for the exit that was at least 2 miles away. I didn't hesitate to follow her. We finally stopped near the latch fence that leads to where she stays at, and we looked back. It was slowly walking back into the trees. This sight, to this day, still gives me chills. I guess I'll start with a background. I'm a 33-year-old female, but the story takes place when I was a teenager, living in the suburb of Chicago. The village I lived in was quiet and middle class. We lived like a mile from the police station, And the worst crimes we had was a murder or two and robbery once in a blue moon. 99% of the time, boring and more boring. Unless you had a car, you were stuck just walking around the park at night with your friends, which was kind of boring. But anyways, one night, my girlfriend and I decided to go hang out at a park with some guys at like 12 a.m. The night was a bit windy and had a full moon. I even got a kiss that night from the boy that I liked, but the night wasn't just fun and hanging out late. There's a deep forest in the park with a stream with a playground right next to it. The same playground we went to with swings and jungle gym columns. There's a bridge, the one that everyone uses, and another bridge made of rocks that's barely used because it's deeper in the forest. They're both over the stream, connecting the forest and park area. I'll get to the rock bridge in a minute. We hung around on the swings and chatted and just spent the evening together. I'm sitting down and just looking around, talking and enjoying the peace and quiet and the moonlight. I have a full view of the forest. I then see something moving deep in the woods, some dark shape. It looked like it was crawling out of the forest, an arm, then another arm. Then it pulls itself out of the stream. This figure happens to be darker than the surrounding forest. As I'm just sitting there, frozen, I think I'm seeing things. And it just kind of lays there on the ground, but it doesn't move. A flash of fear comes across me. What if it comes this way? I then look over to my friends and no one notices anything. I look back and it's gone. Did it go back or go somewhere? At this point, I really want to get out of there. Then, one of my friends is asking all of us, did you guys hear about the urban legend of the rock bridge over the stream? Apparently, some kids or something played on the bridge and fell over and died. What a thing to say after what I saw, but I didn't ask anyone anything and just pretended that I never saw anything. But this experience stuck with me. I never talked about it because it must have been my imagination. Things like that only happen in scary movies, right? After all of this, I rarely went to the park after that. Who knows what would have happened if this black thing saw me the same time that I saw it. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek, and it only takes about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I try to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams, there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips, I don't know why I even opened my mouth. but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. Hello? My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I was gonna faint. Hello? My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply. Hello? 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 As my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. Hello? 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 It repeated. Stop it! I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sound. There were no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. Stop it! It mimicked back. I had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard some rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the bush as it came further out and stood up on twos. I took off. I flew out of the woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mom came in at some point and asked me if everything was alright. I replied yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I was afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. But this terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds got quiet. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. Hello? I cried. It was all I could do. Hello? Stop it! It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said. But then, it did something new. It called my name. Amy. My mother's voice. Amy. Amy. Come here. Hello? Stop it. My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature that they called yenaglooshi, or he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that this witch had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said. in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like, Amy. It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it into my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is this thing seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word nagual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also on some other countries in Latin America, we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night, I remember, because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house, in a small pueblo, or small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away, you have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes, only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong, or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a naguat. He told us he spoke to that man and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok, so I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Our ward at church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just wooded area with a little bit of swamp. We would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night, when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast, and he would hide really good so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep in the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might have gone a little bit further than we normally go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to a swamp-like area where the water is most likely shin deep, and we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale, but he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then, all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us, yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years everybody made fun of it, calling the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another.